A government geologist knelt in the Colorado gravel, picked up a rough diamond, and saw grooves left by a jeweler's wheel. Nature doesn't polish stones. A man in a shop does. That one scratch was worth $10 million. It's 1872. In a single afternoon, that stone destroyed America's richest mining company. Here's how it got built. San Francisco then ran on one thing, and it wasn't gold anymore. It was the rumor of gold. Comstock silver had turned clerks into millionaires in a season. Everyone knew somebody it had happened to. So the whole city sat there twitchy, waiting for the next thing. Two men walked in carrying it. Philip Arnold and John Slack. Cousins from Kentucky. Weathered, quiet, dressed like men who'd slept outdoors for years. They came into a bank near closing with a canvas sack, and asked to leave it in the vault. The clerk asked what was in it. They went silent. They said they'd rather not say. That hesitation was the entire con. A man selling you something talks. A man protecting something doesn't. So the clerk pried it out of them. Rough diamonds, found out west. And please don't tell anybody. He told everybody by morning. That was the plan. The sack did the selling for them. Word reached William Ralston, who ran the Bank of California and, in every practical sense, ran the city. Ralston had financed the Comstock mines and built the Palace Hotel. He was used to being early on everything. He'd missed nothing in 20 years. The thought of missing this one is what actually caught him. He sent for the prospectors. They didn't come running. They arrived late and looked uncomfortable the whole time. They said they weren't businessmen. They said this was over their heads. They kept asking to leave. Every reluctance pulled Ralston further in. He wasn't chasing gems now. He was chasing two men who didn't want him. Then he asked to see the field. They agreed, with one condition that should have ended the whole thing. His men could come along, but they'd ride the last stretch blindfolded, so the location stayed secret. Reasonable if you're guarding a fortune. Perfect if you're steering people away from noticing where they're. They traveled for days, then stumbled the final miles over loose rock with cloth tied across their eyes. The blindfolds came off on a bare mesa in what's now the far northwest corner of Colorado. Wind, sagebrush, red dirt, nothing for 30 miles in any direction. And then one of them bent down. Diamonds loose in the gravel, rubies sitting in the anthills, sapphires wedged into cracks in the rock. They dug with pocket knives for hours and kept finding more. They rode home with their pockets full. One of them wrote that the ground looked as if it had been sown by hand. He meant it as a compliment. Now, you're thinking somebody should have tested those stones. Somebody did, the best there was. The gems were carried to New York and laid on a table in front of Charles Lewis Tiffany. Tiffany's word was the standard for jewels in America. If he blessed a stone, the stone was blessed. He studied the parcel with his lapidary, took his time, and valued that one small pouch near $150,000. In 1872 money. From a handful. The room did the multiplication and forgot to breathe. Except Tiffany had built his life on cut, finished, mounted stones, sold across a counter in Manhattan. He'd almost never handled rough diamonds straight out of the ground. That's a completely different trade. He was the most trusted man in the room, and nobody wanted to be the one doubting Tiffany out loud. That's the first mechanism here. Expertise borrowed from the wrong field looks exactly like expertise. The money came fast after that. Rothschild's American agent, a former Union general. Lawyers with famous clients. Horace Greeley, who told an entire generation to go west, lent his name to it as well. They built a company capitalized at $10 million, an almost unthinkable number for the time. 25 shareholders, hand-picked, each one rich enough to make the other 24 feel safe. That's the second mechanism. Nobody verified anything, because everybody assumed somebody more careful already had. To be certain, they hired an engineer, not a cheerleader. Henry Janin, famous for killing bad claims. Janin had examined hundreds of mines and condemned most of them. His whole reputation was built on saying no. He rode out to the mesa in the summer of 1872 with witnesses watching and started digging. Within days he'd pulled diamonds out of the dirt with his own hands, in front of all of them. He reported that a couple dozen men could wash $1 million a month out of that ground. He took his fee, took shares, and told friends it was the finest property he'd ever inspected. Here's what nobody caught. Janin was an expert in ore, in mines, in rock that carries metal. He had never examined a diamond field in his life, because America had never had one. So he tested the only thing he knew how to test. Were the gems there? They were. He never asked the other question, the one that actually mattered. Did they belong there? That's the hinge this entire story turns on, and it's worth stealing for your own life. A good fraud almost never fails the authenticity test. The gems were genuine. Tiffany wasn't lying. It fails the location test. Real things sitting somewhere they could never have naturally arrived. Don't ask whether it's real, ask how it got there. Every victim here skipped the second question. If that just reframes something for you, that's exactly what this channel is for. Stick around, because the two men who built that field understood the principle better than everyone they fooled. Arnold had worked for a mining drill company, handling industrial diamonds. The cheap, ugly, useful kind. So he knew what almost no American knew. Low-grade rough gems sell in Europe by the handful for very little. He and Slack scraped together a few $1,000s and bought a starter batch of poor stones. Those were the gems in the sack at the bank. The bait cost less than a decent house. Then, with Ralston's own advance money sitting in his pocket, Arnold sailed for London. Sit with that for a second. The investors paid for the gems they were about to be shown. In London and Amsterdam he bought uncut diamonds, rubies, garnets, sapphires. Flawed, in bulk, dirt cheap. Then the two of them rode out to an empty mesa and spent days on their knees in the dirt, pressing stones into crevices, dropping them into anthills, scattering them exactly where a kneeling man would look. It's the most tedious crime imaginable. Two middle-aged men planting jewelry in gravel, for weeks. And they nearly walked away clean. Then the con met a man who'd been mapping that exact ground. Clarence King was 30 years old, and ran the government's geological survey along the 40th parallel. For years his teams had crossed those mountains on foot, measuring and mapping them at public expense. Late in 1872, his colleagues overheard travelers on a train talking about a fabulous secret diamond field. They compared the loose clues, the landmarks, the riding times, the shape of the mesa, against their own maps. And King went cold. If that field was real, his survey had walked right past it. That was the real threat to him, not the fraud, the failure, his life's work becoming a joke. So 4 men set out in November, into the snow, to find a place nobody would name. They rode for days, sighting off peaks, until they cut wagon ruts running out into open nothing. At the end of them stood a stake, a notice board, and Henry Janin's signature on the claim. They camped in freezing wind and started at first light, sifting the gravel through a handscreen. Diamonds came up almost at once. Then rubies. King didn't celebrate, he got very quiet. Because diamonds and rubies form in different rock, under different conditions, in effectively different worlds. Finding them mixed in one patch of shallow gravel is like finding your car keys in the freezer. Then the pattern surfaced. Gems only turned up where the ground had already been disturbed. Every anthill holding a ruby had a bootprint beside it. The untouched anthills held nothing at all. Stones sat in crevices, no flood or frost could have wedged them into, they'd been pushed in by a thumb. One of the men said it flatly. The whole field's a fraud, any fool could see it in an hour. But the proof, the thing you could set on a table in San Francisco, came up in the screen next. A rough diamond with one face flattened and grooved, the unmistakable mark of a lapidary's wheel. That stone had sat in a jeweler's shop, been held against spinning grit, and then thrown away. Half-cut rejects pile up in workshops all over Europe. Somebody had bought a lot of them cheap. Nature makes diamonds under furnace pressure 100 miles down. Nature doesn't leave tool marks. King rode out, caught a train, and reached San Francisco nearly dead on his feet. He told the board that night. They didn't believe him, so he took them out to see it themselves. Standing on the mesa, Janin admitted it. The company dissolved within days. The shares went to nothing. Ralston repaid some investors personally. 3 years later his bank collapsed, and he drowned in the bay the next day. Arnold went home to Kentucky rich, opened his own bank, and died in 1878 after a shotgun fight with a rival. Slack simply vanished. He surfaced years later in New Mexico, quietly building coffins, and died there almost unnoticed. King became the first director of the United States Geological Survey. The man who checked the ground. Here's what's worth keeping. Every expert in this story checked whether the treasure was real. One man checked whether it belonged. 2 prospectors beat Tiffany, Rothschild money and the hardest engineer alive, and lost to a man with a handscreen. Cases like this deserve to be remembered. Like and subscribe so the next one isn't forgotten. Next time, the con man who sold the Eiffel Tower for scrap metal, then came back and sold it again. Until then, don't ask whether it's real, ask how it got there.